I'm just going to take a few minutes to say I want to thank Chris and Rogelio for doing this because with the Framber Valdez signing, I think everyone is geeked to the max for the Tigers season. I'm telling people this is going to be 68 or 84 all over again, and I hope that's true. Um, but we had some bad news this week, as probably everyone who's a Tigers fan knows. We lost Mickey Lolich, hero of the 68 World Series, and we lost Ron Teasley, who many of you will know. What is this? Stay as co-host. Sorry, I'm getting snarly messages from Zoom here. Okay. And it was a big deal in Detroit. Ron Teasley, some people don't know him. He was the second to last player to play in the major Negro Leagues before 1949. That is the Major League Baseball designated era of 1920 to 1948. And he died on Tuesday morning at age 99. He celebrated his 99th birthday a week earlier. Ron is a great guy. One of the privileges of my life is living in Detroit and being able to hang out with Ron Teasley at Hamtramck Stadium and with his family. I published a tribute to Ron on the Hamtramck Stadium website. If you want to read it, you can go there, hamtramckstadium.org/news, and you can find it. If not, I can post a link here in the chat, which I should have thought to do beforehand. Um, Anyway, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Teasley. I'm not going to say much about Lolich here because I've allocated 15 to 20 minutes at the end for people to talk about their memories. I thought rather than me telling a lot of Tigers fans what they already know and what they've already read if they didn't know it, if they're too young or whatever, it was better to let people um, talk about their own memories and do a personal tribute here. Um, So I'm going to talk a little bit of Ron Teasley. Ron Teasley played for the New York Cubans, cup of coffee in 1948. The Cubans at that time were members of the Negro American League. The Cubans were not a good team that year. However, they were, um, I'm sorry, I'm trying to let in some more guests. There we go. They were the defending Negro League champions. They had won the 47 World Series, Negro World Series. Um, Ron was so far as I can tell, the eighth black player signed by the Dodgers, Jackie Robinson being number one. He was invited to spring training in 48 at Vero Beach, and he made the team along with Sammy Gee, Gee, who was a one of the best high school athletes Detroit ever produced. And there are a lot of great high school athletes from Detroit. Played three or four sports, I can't remember which. Also played for the Harlem Globetrotters briefly. Was one of the first black players in the Cubs minor league system. Um, he and Teasley were signed at the same time in spring of 48, were sent to Olean, New York in the Class D Pony League, where they were cut loose a little over a month later, even though Teasley was batting 267 and tied for the league lead in home runs, playing first base, and Gee was batting over 300 and playing shortstop. They were 20 and 21, respectively, at the time. They certainly didn't get a fair chance. The Dodgers didn't explain it sufficiently. It looks like the Dodgers decided they weren't going to become major league regulars, and the Dodgers didn't want to have them on the bench as black players. That's what was speculated at the time, and it makes sense given what I know because that was the last year Olean was in the Dodgers system. And a year or two later, Olean was independent, and they had a black player, Chuck Harmon, who was one of the pioneering black players for the Cincinnati Reds all year. So I have no reason to believe it was the town of Olean or the Olean ownership. I believe it was the Dodgers, which is hard to square with what we know of Branch Rickey, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the real reason behind their being cut loose was. It made no sense because in addition to being two of the better players on the team, they didn't have a first baseman to replace Teasley, so they put a pitcher at first base until they could bring somebody from another affiliate, which again, it's just crazy. Um, but strange things happen, and Branch Rickey was both a saint and an SOB. if you know anything about him. So it appears that's why they were cut loose. Anyway, Ron served in the Navy 2 years in the Pacific, at the end of World War II and in 46 on Saipan. He graduated from Wayne State, still holds many records from Wayne State baseball team, including the career single season batting average at 500. He was given the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame Treasure Award 4 years ago, I believe. It was the first Treasure Award they gave out. That seemed like a great honor, although I was upset because I nominated him for the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame and they refused to admit him. So it was really like a consolation prize. Although it was nice. They had a beautiful ceremony and everything. It wasn't to my taste because they should have admitted him. He was the first black player on the Northwestern High School in Detroit's basketball team, I believe, the second black player on their baseball team, probably captained both teams. I've got conflicting information on that. Northwestern High School is one of the biggest high schools in Detroit. High school produced Willie Horton and a bunch of other major leaguers, and it was an athletic powerhouse. Ron went on to play in the Mandak League and win or become an all-star in the Mandak League in 1950. He then spent the rest of his life teaching and coaching in the Detroit public schools. He had, I believe, 15 players signed professional baseball contracts, 3 players signed to NBA contracts, and 2 of whom made the NBA, including Terry Tyler, who started at the University of Detroit, now Detroit Mercy. Um, and he was a photojournalist and did photojournalism for the Michigan Chronicle, which is the oldest black newspaper in Detroit. There were ones before it, but it's the oldest one still publishing. He was a great guy. He was a mentor to many generations of kids in Detroit, black kids and athletes, and he is going to be sorely missed. Okay, so it's 12:09. So I said at 12:10 we'd start the Rogelio and Chris show, and these guys are going to amaze you with their knowledge. I'm going to tell you up front, I'm not getting paid for this. Rogelio is my friend. I've met Chris once by accident in the press box. I'm not getting paid for this. For my money, their prospect rankings and more importantly, their scouting reports on their prospects are by far the best. I will maybe later mention Max Anderson. They wrote about Max Anderson this year in a way in which I think they know more than any of the national services do. So I'm going to turn the show over to them. They can tell you how you can find their stuff on the web, on Patreon, how you can subscribe, and all the things they do, because they have about 6 different platforms they're on. Okay, Rogelio and Chris.
Thanks, Gary, for the warm introduction. We much appreciated that. And welcome. And first and foremost, Happy New Year to everybody in 2026. And yeah, this has been a rough week for everybody with Willie Horton passing away and Ron Tisley. And so, but baseball just around the corner. It's coming up on Wednesday's pitchers and catchers report. And we've noticed in the last month or two that the Tiger prospect rankings, including Keith Law, who's notoriously hard on the Tigers, is actually been complimentary, including what Gary just mentioned about Max Anderson. He gave some nice words about Max Anderson, except that he wishes he was a catcher because his fielding was that bad. But Chris can attest to this. I think that we can start there with some of the progress that we've seen so far. And Max Anderson comes to mind, Chris, because we saw the batted ball data in Toledo. Last year he came in and we were not really high on him. We weren't sure what was going on, but then he got in shape, talking to him a little bit and what he was working on. And, you know, he stepped up his game up, and we're going to get to the obvious names too, but I wanted to start with Anderson only because the Tigers have what we're witnessing for the first time in maybe 30, 40 years, an actual infield stop it. I mean, they have a lot of infield prospects, Chris.
They do absolutely. And yeah, thank you, Gary, for the kind words, and thanks everybody for listening to us. We did this last year, and we ended up just going down through the entire list of all our, I think it was 46 prospects then.
Yeah.
So we'll probably do that again too. But yeah, you know, Max Anderson is a fascinating player. He was their second round pick in 2023. They picked Max Clark with the third overall pick, and then they took Kevin McGonigal around 39, I think, 30 somewhere in the late 30s. And then Max Anderson was a guy they actually gave a lower bonus to help save some money for getting McGonigal, and then their next pick, Paul Wilson, a left-handed pitcher. And he did not have a particularly, Max Anderson, he's kind of a second baseman. not a traditional athletic build, if you will. He's a little wider and I wouldn't call him agile by any means, but he didn't have a great professional debut. Was mostly, I think, entirely actually in low A. Did he get up to Erie at the very end of the year? I forget.
Yeah, for like 9 games, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Uh, it was fine, but it wasn't what you would expect from a second round pick. It kind of felt like, yeah, this is not, it's not going to work. And then he came out last year and was excellent. He tore the cover off the ball for the first 3 months of the year in Erie. I want to say he was hitting 360 or something like that. And then he had a really rough month of July, I think, at least traditionally, but they did move him up to AAA and he held his own up there. So yeah, he suddenly becomes an interesting prospect in the system. And then he went out to the Arizona Fall League, which is, a very hitter friendly environment, and had a strong case to be named the MVP there. I think some national writers thought he should have been the MVP over Kevin McGonigal, but McGonigal's the bigger name, and he played a few more games. But yeah, so he's a classic case of somebody whose minor league production kind of masks some of the issues with his profile. I don't know if you want to get into those, Raj, or if we want to.
Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit about his profile. Last year, the case was is that a lot of people in the organization thought, just kind of like, okay, well, they're skeptical because it's this first year of being productive and quote unquote being in shape. And so when they started putting him at third base in late June and July out in Erie, that's when it was like, okay, well, what is he capable of doing? And his range was decent. I'm not gonna say it was like groundbreaking compared to speaking to Hayu Lee, but he definitely showed a little bit. He got at the beginning of the year when we were out in Erie. I was out there for opening day, and he looked terrible. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. There was a couple. I remember texting Chris, and I was just like, man, just simple ground balls to second base he was missing on. But he got better, and at third, like I said, he held his own and he's in this position like Jace Young and Hayu Lee, where I think personally they're not true third basemen. When I think of a true third baseman, I think of a guy who can hit 20 to 30 home runs, that can show a gun, like just pretty much a cannon from an arm. And Anderson doesn't have that. And both Anderson and I think Lee has a better arm, but the one of the things too that we did hear about why he struggled towards the tail end of the area because he thought he was getting traded. Allegedly that's something we were hearing about, and so it affected his play when he got up to Toledo. So, but the adjustment at Toledo, I was pleasantly surprised. But it's just again the difference between Toledo and Detroit. Can he be a 15 to 20 home run guy? If he can do that, then I think he finds himself a spot at the MLB roster. It's just I don't think he's athletic enough to play left field or anything, Chris. I mean, I know the Tigers need some outfielders, but I don't think he's it to put him out there.
No, probably not. And I think you were there the first time he was taking ground balls at third base. It was well before game. Rogelio happened to be in Erie, and you tweeted it out or posted it, and wasn't it somebody on the Erie staff was trying to give you a hard time, saying that they were upset with you, and then you talked to them and they weren't upset at all, and so it was just this one guy kind of messing with you. So
Yeah,
that we'll remember that one, because you don't want to, like, we're independent and we don't want to. We want to be honest about what we see, but we don't want to upset the organization because they could just deny us
yeah,
access. Um, but anyway, yeah. So I think for me, Max Anderson, it's a little bit of a conundrum because he hits well, he's got good power, and but beyond that, there aren't really any secondary skills. He's not fleet of foot at all. He's kind of a plodding runner. And as Raj touched on, he's not a great defender anywhere you put him. It was nice to add third base to his repertoire, but he's not a great second baseman either. Um, and he doesn't walk. And that's kind of the big thing there, where if you are only an offensive player and you swing at everything, even if you make a ton of contact, if you don't add the extra value with walking, then you absolutely have to hit a ton at the big league level. And so it just makes it a much tougher profile for me. And generally speaking, you don't see guys add that sort of on base ability as they go up levels. Every now and then, somebody, major league veteran can cut down on their strikeouts a little bit. You see, like Adrian Beltre did that toward the end of his career. But for the most part, you are who you are in terms of plate discipline. So that's kind of a red flag for me. But we do have to give him some grace. He's still only 23, I think, might be 24 now. and he's only in his this will be his third full season in the minors. So he's an interesting prospect. Definitely one of the things about the system, and I guess we can go into the system as a whole right now, is that it's from the outside looking in, it's very top heavy. The Tigers have four sort of borderline elite prospects, at least certainly two elite prospects in Kevin McGonigal and Max Clark, and then two sort of somewhere between top 30, top 50-ish prospects in Bryce Rayner and Josue Briseño. And then after that, there's a group of 10, 15, 20 guys who are very interesting, but aren't really anywhere close to the top 100, except Max Anderson. He's the one that we've seen. Keith Law, you said, put him in his top 100, and Kylie McDaniel at ESPN had him ranked 101. So I guess, nationally speaking, Max Anderson's right on the cusp there, but it's really it's a big spike at the beginning and then kind of like a broad, flat list of a lot of guys that are interesting. So we go through that in a little bit, but one of the big things is that almost all of these guys near the top are hitters. There's not a lot of pitching right now.
And
Yeah,
not a lot of great fielders either, right?
right. And even in the outfield, for example, a guy that is not near any prospect list, but one guy I want to mention is Roberto Campos, who the reason I want to mention him is because the Tigers outfield situation right now, outside of Max Clark, we did have we had a podcast on really good, excellent Substack website guys called Down on the Farm, and they were really high on Ben Malgeri, who we've noticed he's been in the system for a while. He's a good defender, but we weren't sure about his prospects. Actually, got off to a really good start in spring training. It was we had a listener remind us of that, and so oh yeah, and he did really well, and then reality set in. I'm not sure what happened after that, but the Tigers, as far as even in terms of offense or defensive outfielders right now, Max Clark took a couple steps forward. I think he's a really good defender, but I mean, after that, you have a couple guys lower, like Steph Stevenson, for example. His size is kind of, you worry about his size a little bit, but that's where I think sometimes the concern comes in. But the way the Tigers have been drafting, and we're talking to Carlos Collazo of Baseball America. He said that doesn't really matter. You can always trade for an outfielder later. And I thought about after he said that, it just made me think, okay, well, based off the way they have themselves positioned with up the middle guys, you have the luxury of trading a guy like for example, Jace Young or Anderson for an outfielder that you believe can fit your system. And right now, I don't think the Tigers on an upper level have that outside of Max Clark, because they're trying to make these guys all super utility players. And Chris, I don't know. I mean, when we look at our top five, we have McGonigal number one, Clark, Rayner, Briseño, and Sears. Sears is the only pitcher in there, and we'll get to Sears a little later. But you look at those top four with Briseño, who didn't get a lot of time at first base last year. He was primarily catching, which I think is going to be his primary position, because Tyron Lorenzo did not catch after, I think, mid-July, I want to say. But you look at these top four, and these guys clearly have some sort of position value in the infield. Or, excuse me, Clark being the clear outfielder, but Rayner, a guy who I think could be a future third baseman, McGonigal, either a shortstop or second, but I still think he's better suited for second.
I'm sorry, Rogelio. I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think Rayner can't play short, or you think that McGonigal will hold the position down?
I think Rayner could play short, but I think we looked at his range last year, and there were some throws. I mean, he was just on the outfield side of the grass, just just literally just lasers to first. And I think that's the reason why I think he might, if McGonigal is going to be your shortstop of the future, that's not a bad way to go either. However,
No, of course, I agree.
But I think Rayner has a little more gas in the tank, if you will.
And I think Raj got to see he got to see the playoffs in Double A, where Kevin McGonigal, the number 2 prospect in all of baseball, it's absolute consensus. Everybody who's made a list has him number 2. He also got to see number 1, Connor Griffin, a prospect in baseball, who is a just an athletic monster. I keep comparing him to like Calvin Johnson, but playing baseball. He's 6'4", incredibly agile, incredibly fast, and he looks like a potential elite shortstop. And so when you watch someone like him play shortstop, and then you watch Kevin McGonigal play shortstop, you go, okay, he might be able to survive there, but he's probably not an ideal like a plus shortstop. You're talking maybe Trey Sweeney level defender, which is fine. You can get by with that, especially if you can hit like we think McGonigal can hit. But I do think Rayner has a better chance to stick at shortstop. Um, he's not particularly, super agile either, but that arm strength does give him more range and allows him. I've compared him to kind of Carlos Correa as a shortstop defender, just somebody who's not going to make these spectacular athletic diving plays, but he's going to be able to go in the hole and get you out because of the 70 grade arm strength. Now, the one concern there is he separated his shoulder and had to have surgery, I believe. So you hope that arm strength comes back, and that's one of the things we're going to need to see this year.
Yeah,
Um,
and the thing about like the last year watching Connor Griffin in the playoffs, and I like Keith Law, who made a comp that he reminds him of Robin Yount, and I totally believe that. The thing about McGonigal as a short, it was that he has the range to play, he has the arm strength to play, but I just think sometimes when it comes to side, he overthinks it a little bit. Just sometimes like the little most routine plays he fumbles it, whereas Griffin is kind of a smooth and natural. But Griffin also showed, I gotta admit, he impressed me in terms of his presence at the plate. Everything was loud. Everything was hit. Comparatively speaking, when we first saw him in Lakeland, or down in Lakeland when they were playing the Flying Tigers, Griffin struck out quite a bit. He was sometimes he looked like he had a big hole in his swing, but like that he straightened it out, and he's going to be a plus guy for Pittsburgh, depending on how they blow that or what have you. Sorry, I was thinking the Pirates just doing things like just, oh, how much money can we save? How much things
they
were at,
were
yeah,
they were in on Framber Valdez. They tried. They've won the
tried.
We Tried award this offseason. I the one thing I did want to touch on a little bit, and then we can move on into this year's prospect rankings if we want. But I wanted to just do a quick recap of last year because the Tigers had an incredibly successful year down in the farm. They had the best winning percentage cumulatively across all the minor leagues by far. They were over 60%. Nobody else was above 57%. Um, and I would be remiss. I don't know, our buddy Jesse Goldberg Strassler, who's the announcer for the Lansing Lugnuts. He likes to point out that the Tigers tend to have the oldest roster at each level, their minor league affiliates. And it's true. I don't think they necessarily are doing that just to win these minor league championships, right? But I think that they prefer to fill in their non-prospect roles with players who are established in pretty good minor league ball players rather than organizational depth, if you will. But yeah, last year you Toledo got off to a really brutal start. I think it was 5-17 and ended up going 84-66. Gabe Alvarez, the manager there, has had an incredibly successful managerial career so far in the minors. It's 3 trips to the AA championship, two titles, and then this year in Toledo. And then AA Erie made the playoffs, made the championship game for the third consecutive year, but did lose to Binghamton, the Binghamton Mets, who had a very strong team. West Michigan Whitecaps, the high A affiliate, had one of the greatest minor league seasons of all time. They went, I think, 93-39 in
Yep.
the regular season with a run differential of close to plus 300 runs. They were just an absolute juggernaut. And then they swept their way through the playoffs, won the championship. The low A Lakeland Flying Tigers won their championship down there, despite losing a lot of players, including Bryce Rayner and Frenier Bermontia, two of their best hitters. And even the Florida Complex League Tigers made the playoffs. So it was an incredibly successful season. I did, I mentioned that the one caveat there that they often are older than other teams. The one other thing that we've kind of found out that how they sort of game the system, if you will, and I kind of compare this to, uh, you know, the Moneyball. Sort of the main concept there was, getting on base, right, walking, things like that. And eventually we discovered that that's great. Walking a lot is great in the minors, but a lot of prospects who walked a ton in the minors, they get exposed at the higher levels because they're doing that by not swinging. And minor league pitching is not nearly as good as major league pitching, and so they don't throw as many strikes. And the Tigers have kind of done the opposite of that, where they now have figured out that a lot of these minor league hitters, they're not very good. So if you throw a bunch of strikes, you're going to get people out. And so they at each level they're among the lowest walk rates, and so I think that's how they're winning a lot of these games. Is just challenging these hitters who aren't very good. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have this army of incredible pitchers coming. So I just wanted to point that part out.
Yeah,
Well,
especially.
Chris,
Oh, sorry. Go
Chris,
ahead.
do you think other organizations have picked up on that, or do you think the Tigers are unique?
It's I would it wouldn't shock me if other organizations are doing that. I'm not sure how many other organizations really place this amount of value in competing in the minor leagues. Like I
Okay.
was saying, the Tigers, I don't think they're bringing in these guys to win these championships, but they do believe strongly that players benefit from playing meaningful games at every level.
I,
In other organizations, Tampa has done that for a while
I
now.
was gonna say Tampa. Yeah, yeah. Tampa's really good with that because they were dominating for the last what 5 6 years, Chris. They were winning.
Yeah,
I know Durham was doing really well. Montgomery, the Biscuits, that's their double A affiliate, and I believe I think low A or high or no, it was high A that they was doing really well on too.
Bowling
So
Green.
Bowling Green, yeah, they across the system, Tampa had the same kind of emphasis, and no surprise because Rob Metzler came from that organization.
So yeah, I don't know what. Yeah,
Oh,
hopefully
oh,
that's a
oh, I was going to add the one of the things too that I noticed about one of the biggest things the Tigers, the emphasis in the last couple of years is to spend money on resources. So, for example, one of the things that kind of we didn't think about it till it happened, but Chris and I were noticing when they put the overhang down in Lakeland so the pitchers can throw in the shade or in the rain, something that should have been done, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, and Lakeland being what it is, was finally done. And so that made a world of difference. They're getting a new, I think that new or the player complex that was the first time they built anything since 71, 72, something like that, or even beforehand. They started spending money on the nutrition, the little things like this, like giving Spanish players translation stuff for the first time, and I know we were sitting here like thinking in ourselves like, it hasn't been done before. No, it hasn't, and I think making these minor league players a priority for the first time. And I know that I talked about this with Gary before because Gary has that historical context that I do not have because obviously I wasn't around, but just the fact
Yeah,
that
translate. I'm a lot older than you.
I was just gonna say the fact that the Tigers during the Tom Monahan days weren't spending money at all to, and I'm not blaming all of him on Monahan either, but in a way, if you look at the way uh, the Bill LaJoy and is it Bill William Campbell or Campbell built these organization, they built it within, but they really did not evolve with that. And so for the Tigers to take 30 odd years to evolve, that's why we're probably seeing not correction. That's why we are seeing the progress and the in talking to Ryan Garko about this a couple of years ago, you're seeing a Tiger system, like the Cardinal way. And it's not just lip service like Al Avila used to say, the Tiger way and the whole Caesar system, and all that nonsense that really wasn't. This is a lot of words that just didn't mean anything. But now you're actually seeing them spending money on the facilities. And with I know fans complain about the Tigers building within and they're not spending money, but these things matter. I mean, proper nutrition, having good housing, things that mentally are available, I think has made a big difference on what we're seeing on the product on the field in the minor leagues.
I do think we touched on this a little bit last year, but yeah, it was for many, many years. And whenever we talk to someone like Lance Parrish or some player who came up through the 70s, right? They had one minor league coach through for all the levels. For many years, the minor leagues were treated as kind of a survival of the fittest. Like this is just we're not going to support you. If you make it through, we know you have the stuff to be a big leaguer. There was no support. And with all the money in baseball now, teams have realized that these are literally investments. You really are investing. If you spend $5 million, to upgrade everything, and you get one big leaguer out of that, it's worth it. Winslow Perez has, one and a half career WAR already, or three career WAR, depending on where you look. To get a player like that on the open market, you're spending just as much as you spent on the facility upgrades.
Yeah,
So it
oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I
oh,
thought you were
yeah, go ahead,
pausing.
Gary. That's fine.
To elaborate on what Rogelio and Chris are saying, the Tigers for decades literally were a sink or swim system. It'd be like if teaching your kids to swim by throwing them in the deep end of the pool and then walking away. And if you come back, an hour later and they haven't drowned, then maybe you give them a little help or a little instruction. And Bill Joy actually said exactly that. He used the phrase, "We're not going to wipe their nose for them" or something. And then when the Tigers, they were one of the last organizations to put coaches at every level, that is aside from the manager and having roving coaches. They were one of the last ones to do that. They did it the wrong way, of course. They started at AAA and then went down when you really need the coaching most at the lowest level. It was just crazy. And it really wasn't until Scott Harris came in that they joined the 21st century. I mean, they weren't that bad 10, 15 years ago, but they weren't anywhere near the cutting edge of any organization in terms of how they were developing their prospects. And their coaches were old school guys. They did not have the equipment. They did not have the technology. They did not have the baseball operations people. They didn't have the analysts. They didn't have the analytical grounding, and they didn't have the people to communicate the analytics to the players and the coaches. And the coaches were old school guys who was basically, "Hey, I'll help you if you ask me. I'm not going to butt in." And most of their instruction, like the hitters, was be more aggressive. Sophisticated instruction was be more aggressive in the strike zone. It was just amazing. And so while Harris has done a great job, in my view, he was coming in from an organization that was so far down that any progress he made makes him look brilliant. And I think he's brilliant.
No, you bring up a good point there, Gary, too, because talk about progress, but there's been some sort of regression in a way, and that involves the pitching in the minor league system. And the reason why we mention that is, so for example, one of the things that there's three things that stand out about the system right now, pitching wise. One, there was a lot of injuries that affected the progress on low A and high A last year, and you can see it in the way they stack the games. Where, for example, is it Lowry or who's like reliever Chris or Howery?
Preston Howie.
Yeah, thank you. He was a reliever in the beginning of the year, and then they made him a starter. But the way West Michigan did their starts last year was a lot of, and the same thing with Lakeland, was a lot of openers. So a lot of times when Chris and I would go, all right, Chris and I would split duties on, oh, I'll watch Lakeland tonight, you watch Erie, what have you, yada yada. You didn't know who the pitcher was till the last minute, so there's no way sometimes for us to even go, okay, what are we going to see here to the last possible second? And so there was a lot, like Gabe Rivas, for example, was picked up by the Rockies, and he's not on the major league level. There was a large miscommunication, and this is something that we heard and we saw this firsthand. Case in point with Dylan Smith. Now, Dylan Smith last year started off really well in Erie, did a fantastic job. They made him a reliever. He got to the big leagues, then he was injured. Well, why was he injured so quickly? And he realized that a lot of these relievers in the lower levels outside of Toledo weren't going back to back. And so, for example, there was a time where we were hearing that they would a reliever, like, so Hinch would talk to the pitching coach in Toledo, which I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. But they would say, hey, have Dylan Smith go back to back. And then, this is allegedly, of course, secondhand, but it was Rivas go, hey, what are you doing? Why is he pitching back to back? Hinch wanted him to see how we do. Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry. And so there was a level of miscommunication when it came from them going to Toledo. And so if you notice last year, there was very little outside of RJ Pettit. I believe there was only a few arms that went up to Toledo because there was, I think there's just a level of figuring out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. But the amount of injuries last year was substantial. I mean, Paul Wilson, we saw for a minute, was gone. Ethel Scheffelbaum, we saw him pitch. Maybe we didn't even see him pitch, actually, now that I think about it. It was a backfield situation, and then we heard that the loss of velocity. And that's another key part. Number two, the loss of velocity in some of these arms. Jaden Ham comes to mind. There, even Garrett Burhan a little bit had some loss of velocity. And Chris, that's the part that we're kind of miffed about right now because they had to really search all the indie leagues to fill some of these spots in the roster.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's chasing velocity is not necessarily an organizational priority right now, which is, that's fine, I guess, on a macro level, but you still need a couple of people who throw very hard because that's just the way the game is going. And they did address that a little bit in the draft with Malachi Witherspoon, one of the better names in the organization now. He throws very hard. But yeah, they had a lot of guys who don't throw particularly hard, and like we see, and that it's no way to have success in the big leagues for the most part these days. So yeah, I mean, it was a down year for pitching development in many ways. And you mentioned that Gabe Rebus is no longer their head of pitching development. We don't know who is. Maybe Garco will tell us. We're supposed to talk to him soon. Uh, and yeah, they just so there's this kind of gap in the system now. Part of it is the previous regime loved to target college pitching, and we've seen the results of that in some regards. And one of those guys is a back-to-back Cy Young winner. That's okay. But the Harris regime and under scouting director Mark Connor, they really spent a lot of money. Basically, any money they save, they turn around and spend it on high school pitching. And so far, none of those high school pitchers have really advanced even beyond an A ball. They just, as Raj said, there's so many of them have gotten injured, and so you wonder if there's something systematically wrong or it's just the nature of the beast there, where pitching is always bad for you. Everybody breaks eventually, and maybe they just had a lot of hard luck. So that's something we really want to keep an eye on this year to see what happens. And when we touch on the prospects, you'll see there it wasn't across the board. There were still some very nice pitching development stories last year. It just wasn't. Uh, you worry down the line because if Skubal and Mize or Flaherty are gone next year, there probably aren't any internal options that they can use aside from Troy Melton.
Yeah, and I think Andrew Sears, and I'm very high on Andrew Sears because last year he went up to Double A from West Michigan, and he to put part of my language a little bit, he's kind of a badass. I mean, he's a guy who he's one of those, like, when you remember guys like the Mad Hungarian, the guy
Lasky, is that Al Hrabosky?
Al Hrabosky, yeah.
yeah, he has, like, or Kevin Saucier for those old Tiger 82, 80, I think he pitched for the Tigers in 82. Um, he's got an edge to him, but it's a good thing. I mean, the reason why I mentioned him, he's number 5 on our list, and he's the only pitcher on our top 10. In our top 10, well, no way, I'm so Salcedo's number 10, right, Chris?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm so high on Sears is because he went up there and against Binghamton, which was one of the best offensive teams in Double A, he hung in there and bounced back. He showed a resolve to me that usually there's an adjustment when they get to West Michigan at Erie. There's that Double A adjustment. Okay. Oh, so Shea. Okay, I did not know that. Thank you. I just remember him getting in a fight with the
Again, I do because I lived through it.
of course, that big
Well,
infamous brawl with the Twins too. Go ahead, Chris.
oh yeah, I mean, like the I guess the more modern-ish comparison would be maybe like Kyle Farnsworth, like
Oh, yeah.
just a big angry guy on the mound. His nickname is Psycho Sears, and that's given to him by his nickname or by his teammates because he gets the ball and throws it within about 3 seconds. He just wants to go, and he's very intense on the mound. And it's when it's going well, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and he bounced back a couple against Binghamton in a start. It was against a start. I think it was a game 5 start or the final game start. He bounced back and was able to hang in there against a very good hitting team, but also the Mets also have just boatloads of pitching prospects. That's a system that's really good. But the reason why I'm high on Sears, I think, is if he's able to do that in his first year in Double A, I would imagine the offseason and then him evolving. I think he's a guy to look out for as a dark horse candidate to make the rotation in 2027. I really believe that. I think that he has the mentality to do so, and the stuff. If he continues to work on it a little bit, I think if he can take another step forward this year, which I think he will, Andrew Sears is a name to look out for.
Yeah, so I don't know what if we want to go through our list
Yeah,
or
let's go. Yeah, well, let's go through our list. Let's go
I don't
into
know
that. So, like, we talked about some of the pitching aspect. It just a lot of the arms are not.
you've disappeared, Raj.
Hold on.
Sorry. Yeah. I we can take some questions too. If anybody has any questions right now, we can do that before we go through the list. I don't know.
Yeah, we can go to questions whenever you want. I had it scheduled to talk until 1, but that's just a guess. I mean, if you want to open mic or you want to open it up to everybody, that's fine because I've been butting in. Is Rogelio back or not?
I'm not. You guys hear me?
No, still don't
No,
have the audio. I
you're
want to.
still
I'll say a couple of things that stall for him. One is that when you're talking about Farnsworth and Soche and these guys, it's sort of what the scouts used to say 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They had $1 million arm with a 10-cent head. Um, the other thing was the way you are describing the Harris regime system. It almost sounds like they were doing the opposite of what Dombrowski did. Dombrowski's motto was grow the bats by the arms. Excuse me, grow the arms by the bats. I'm sorry, grow the arms by the bats. And the Tigers right now are growing the bats and buying the arms, which is interesting. And I'm not dissing them because so far it's been successful. And they got a really talented group of position prospects, or at least the top end of prospects.
You guys hear
I
me?
think you still seem a little bit light there, Raj, but
Okay.
um,
Yeah, I'll take
I don't I
so
don't know if other people chime in, but yeah, I think you're right, Gary, that um, I do think that they want to grow the arms as well as the bats, but I think they have the philosophy, and I tend to agree this that you can kind of find pitching anywhere in the draft or in even minor league free agency. There's so many tools available to pitchers now to get better and improve and gain velocity that you can get impact players. I mentioned Tarek Skubal, ninth rounder. I think he's the second highest ninth rounder to ever, or second highest draft pick to ever win a Cy Young, maybe the third behind Brett Saberhagen and somebody else. Maybe Jacob deGrom was also a ninth rounder. Um, but it's really hard. It's much harder to find impact hitters later in the draft. And so they've really their philosophy seems to be targeting guys who they really believe in the hit tool, the pure ability to put the bat on the ball and play up the middle somewhere, defensively, catcher, second base, shortstop, center field. Because when you start there and guys get bigger or slower, they can always filter out and move over to the corners or first base or anything like that. But which was not necessarily the case under the previous regime, that they would take guys who they really like their bats. And Spencer Torkelson was a first baseman, Jace Young, second baseman, kind of, you know, limited defensively. So that's been a philosophical change here in terms of the bats, and I think it's a smart one. Uh, Now we haven't seen any of the guys filter their way up to the big leagues yet, but they're pretty close now.
and
Right. This is something Bill James made a point. One of the many brilliant points he made 40 years ago, 40 to 45 years ago, was that most people enter Major League Baseball when they enter professional baseball, they enter as a catcher, shortstop, or center fielder, or pitcher, and that the other positions not so much, and that's because these guys are the best athletes on their high school or college team, and that's why they're drafted. And then they get moved to second base or third base or left field or whatever. And it's such a simple insight, but a profound insight. If you're playing second base in college, it better be because you have an All-American playing short who's better than you. Because otherwise, you should have been moved to center field if you were good defensively. And so, except in those circumstances, we have really top prospects playing center and short. If you're at another position on the field, it means you're probably not that good of a prospect.
and there's one thing that I have noticed with the Tiger system in the last couple of years is that they're not afraid to cut ties either. Whereas before in the past, we saw a lot of guys that were hanging on for dear life for org fodder, if you will, but they have been just I don't want to say less patient, I guess, or they're just basically like, look, if you're not fitting our system, you're gone. And as far as like the goes with like pitching, for example, Matt Manning, if there's any indication of a guy that was under like old regime versus new regime, is Matt Manning. Matt Manning. The reason why I bring him up is even after he got traded to Philadelphia, it was so bad they ended up going back down to Double A. And the Tigers tried to work with him. The Tigers were trying to get him to sequence better, to utilize his pitch mix better, and it just wasn't happening. Whereas the opposite of that, for example, Kaiser Montero took instruction from the staff. Same thing with Sergeant Gibson Long, and they had big league jobs. And so the Tigers, that is one thing about the system as we look at our top 50 is that some of the guys that are part of the organization now that were up at the big league level have taken instruction. The Tigers have gone with an individualized plan and go, hey, this might work for you. Here's how it's going to go. And even with the case of, like, for example, Wilmer Flores, same thing. Flores had his own coaching staff a little while. There was some like just back and forth, give and take, where they're like he's not listening, and then it's too little, too late at this point. And now he's out of the organization. Gage Workman took a while. I mean, he was going back and forth with his father. Trey Cruz, same thing. Trey Cruz is on a 40-man roster, but I also think it's because he was taking instruction from the Tigers. When I remember when he first got called to Double A, the Gabe Alvarez was saying, it's kind of like a hot dog. His teammates were kind of, but then he just night and day switch flipped. And yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I remember the one year he was off to a really nice start. You were writing about him, and then the story goes that yes, his dad, Jose Cruz Jr., of course, came to town and messed with his swing because he's a big leaguer. He knows best, right? And he didn't hit for the rest of the year. And so I think eventually, sometimes it takes guys a long time to realize, like, hey, these coaches know what they're doing. I got to listen to them. And I can imagine it's very difficult if your father is a big leaguer and your grandfather is a big leaguer that to think that this guy who never made it out of the minors actually might know better. Uh, but it certainly worked for Trey Cruz. It got him to the big leagues eventually. So good on him there.
Yeah, one of the coolest visuals I saw last year at Erie before he got called to Toledo was his grandfather, the legendary Jose Cruz, and his father, and I think it was his grandmother, all sitting on the third base line in front row, and they're taking notes at the same time, almost in synchronicity. They're just going like this, like looking up, looking down. And it was the coolest thing, funniest thing for any baseball nerd out there to see that it's a whole family involvement. Even the grandmother was just like pointing, and then they're looking at it, and they're all in agreement, like, yeah, he needs to do this and that. It was really cool to see. And Jose Trey Cruz might not be high on our list. He's I believe in the 30s, but he's number 31 on our list. But it doesn't mean that, like, he's another example of what I was mentioning, a guy who worked his ass off. And the same thing with Eduardo Valencia, another 40-man roster. And this is a guy that, he comes up on our list at 20, I believe is in the
Valencia, I think he's 17th.
17th. He was a guy who went out of his way to work. The Tigers wanted him to lose weight. He lost weight, changed up his swing mechanics a little bit to go lighter to the zone. And I would see Troy Melton in the locker room, and he would go, he would go, hey, Rogelio, Edward Valencia, best hitter in the system. And he wasn't joking. Everybody admired his work ethic last year. And this is another story for another example of just the instruction the Tigers gave him, and he worked on it. He was in the system for a little while. I think 2017, 2018 international free agent signing, wow. Chris.
Yeah, and he's one of the great stories in the system last year as a guy who was mostly a backup catcher all throughout the minors. And then basically last year just wouldn't stop hitting. And he hit his way up to the AAA and hit so well. He had a couple monster games at AAA. He had a 3-homer game that actually took place over 2 days because of weather. And he had another game, I think, we had 8 RBIs, something like that, and eventually got added to the 40-man roster. And he was a guy, we knew of him, but I don't think anybody in the world would have had him on a prospect list heading into last year, except for maybe some of the players who saw him performing in the spring training minor league games. So he's a great example of how much things can change in one season.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with Cruz, and that's why our system, if we look at, let's just kind of dive into a little bit with and another name on our top 10, Tyron Alonso, who last year struggled. And he's a polarizing figure with some of our fans, because some fans are like, cut him, look, he's not hitting really good, and get really on him. But in reality, he's young for his level. And last year he dealt some personal setbacks. He had a death in the family, and he had a shoulder injury, and this is, again, one of those things where it's allegedly that the reason why Andrew Graham's not with the organization is because Graham did not want to play him in the playoffs. And so Lorenzo was mandated by the organization to put him in the roster on the lineup. And Graham was the only one that was overridden as far as the lineup goes for the playoffs. Oh, this is, of course, from what we heard and everything. So it was interesting because they believe in him that much, that he made the 40-man roster despite his numbers. And I think and this is something that I think you should put this on a bumper sticker. Catchers take time. That is as simple as that. It's just, you look at Dingler, for example. He struggled when he got to Erie. And look at him now. He's a guy who is one of the best catchers in all the American League. Not to say that Lorenzo is going to head that way, but he does have a good eye at the plate. And I just think all the personal setbacks set him back a little bit, but we still think very highly of him because he's a switching catcher with power, something you don't see very often.
Yeah, and the Tigers are very demanding of their catchers defensively. We saw that even Jake Rogers came into the organization with this great defensive reputation, and he got to the big leagues on that. And even once he got to the big leagues, AJ Hinch, had a lot of suggestions and ways for him to get better, and it took a little while, and he did. So, it is. I maintain that catching is the hardest job in professional sports. It's not the most important job. That's probably quarterback, but it to have to basically know the scouting reports for every hitter, to crouch down for hours a day in the heat or the cold, and then to go up and to have to hit. It's just a very difficult job, and it takes a special kind of person. The people often call them what's the tools of ignorance, right? The people who catch maybe not the smartest, but it's kind of odd because they all become managers, right? So I think that's been proven wrong. But yeah, I don't know. Do we want to start from the bottom and move up and just kind of quickly touch on all these guys, or
Yeah, let's do that. We can do that. So we start from number.
hold on? Let me.
Oh,
Sorry, just real quick. I'll explain our methodology,
yeah.
right?
Oh, please go
Um,
ahead.
we kind of believe in the wisdom of numbers at times, as long as the people involved are, informed. And we thought, we have a fun team of guys. So we basically had everybody put together their own top 50 list in the system. So Rogelio, me, our buddy Jerry Buchanan, we had Colin Arthur, who was was he 20, 21?
Yeah,
Really,
really
really
smart kid.
sharp young kid. And then we had our buddy Joe Rampy, who has gone on to, we don't know what he's doing yet, right? But he seems to
Yeah.
have gotten a job somewhere writing about baseball. So we're super happy about that because he was basically using our site as a way to get his work out there. But the five of us put together our individual lists, and then we just kind of combined them, averaged them out. And the way we did it is that to be on our final list, you had to be on at least four of the lists, individual lists, except for we wanted a nice round number. So we put the two highest ranking guys who got only made it on three lists. So that's our 49th and 50th player. And then everybody else made at least four of our personal lists. So that's hopefully that explains it.
Yeah, and so our 50 number 50, we'll go through these 50 through 40, kind of highlight the names that kind of stand out a little bit. Peyton Graham, who has been injured quite a bit, but showed some progress last year, coming in at number 50. He's a guy who can he might end up playing the outfield too at some point too. He did get some time out there. Michael Massey, by the way, coming in at number 48, still has not pitched yet. And he's been having some injury issues, and so we had him in our 30s last year, but we didn't feel comfortable enough to have that again because we have no idea what he's capable of at this point. Preston Howard, who we mentioned a little earlier, he's a guy. He's interesting. I know he's Chris and I talked about his sister. I believe is some sort of famous Hollywood
She's a,
actress.
she's an actress. Yes, she's in
Yeah,
a Netflix series, Ginny in Georgia, something like that. She's
something like
fairly
that.
successful, so it's interesting. Yeah.
He has a good makeup to him. I think he's going to be a reliever long term. The Tigers put him as a starter last year, I think, out of necessity versus want, because again, with all the injuries happening last year, Yosber Sanchez was a guy who we were really high on for a while. He was one of the few players that are throwing over 100 consistently, but he regressed last year, injury wise, and he kind of had to shut it down last year. And so we're not sure where his status is right now. But this is where the international side of things gets a little interesting here. Jesus Pinto, who is a guy who just signed. The Tigers have not mastered the international thing yet, and we'll talk about that too because it's sprinkled across his top 50. Gabriel Reyes, a guy we're still really high on, a lefty who got off to a slow start last year. He didn't start till I think until like a month after the season started.
Yeah, I think yeah, they kept him back in extended spring, which was kind of odd because we expected him to move up to high A to begin the year, and he repeated in low A.
Yeah, and that was another thing with that, which leads into Rainer Castillo. And Rainer Castillo was in our top 20 at one point. Rainer Castillo is a guy who we really thought that this last year was going to be an Erie at some point, and he was going to be the next big thing. And then we don't know what happened to West Michigan, but he looked very hittable. The slinker that was really playing so well down in Lakeland wasn't happening. And I think Chris, maybe, and this is something that I was looking at his starts a couple weeks ago when I was sick. I was like, oh, what am I going to do the pastime? I'll look at Rainer Castillo stuff. And I think he was experimenting with a couple things. And I think that's what last year was. Maybe because, he was in the Arizona Fall League the year before. So maybe last year it looked like he was trying to play up more of the get swing and miss on his fastball up in the zone. I don't know what was going on with him, but I still believe his arm is valuable. It's just to what extent, I don't know yet. It was just really weird. He had out of all those guys last year, pitching wise, I think he had the strangest year in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, for background, he's a right-handed pitcher, big, strong kid. I think 6'4", probably 240 pounds or so. And 2 years ago, he dominated down in Low A Lakeland. He had a couple excellent outings late in the year. Fastball was sitting 95, 96 and up to 98. And it was a really, heavy bowling ball sinker. And his sharp slider, he needed to develop uh, more of an off-speed pitch. And then last year, the velocity was down 2 to 3 miles an hour, and the slider was really loopy and slow. And so, yeah, it was a good example of kind of the up and down nature of development. Is you can look at these guys and say, oh, just project them to keep improving, and sometimes there's a big step back. So, and those guys are tough to rank for us. We don't want to overreact to them struggling, but at the same time, you have to be honest with yourself and say, is this going to work? So it's a big year for him. But they clearly did believe in him because they bumped him up a level. So we would expect him back in West Michigan, I think.
Yeah, and a guy who also last year went number 40 at Moises Rodriguez, who has a big arm, big velocity, just needs to work on his command a little bit. But he's a guy I like to see what his progress is going to be. So, Chris, do you want to take over from 40 on to number 30? Because I think there's a lot of these guys in this part of the list here are very intriguing. We mentioned Trey Cruz, but one of the guys, Angel De Los Santos, looks like he's stateside, according to a couple of pictures.
Yeah, I'll just roll through. So our 39 is Zach Swanson. He's a high school pitcher, right-handed high school pitcher out of the Washington area, maybe Oregon. Uh, he was one of those guys where they I want to say they gave him $750,000, basically the equivalent of third round money, but they drafted him in the ninth round, and then he immediately blew out his arm. So he has not even pitched in pro ball yet, but we've seen him from when he was an amateur, and he looked very interesting, a very athletic kid who also played basketball. So that's kind of where we are in this 30 to 40 range. Is people with interesting backgrounds and skills, but who knows what they're going to become. 38, Jank Diaz, sort of similar story. He has a very cool background story. He was, I think he's Dominican, but lived in Pennsylvania, and the Tigers took him in the seventh or eighth round a couple years ago. It's been slow going for him. He's another guy who was touching the upper 90s in high school, but is now living more like 92 to 94. Has a good breaking ball, good changeup, but just learning how to pitch. And then and Angel De Los Santos, who Rogelio mentioned, he's a shortstop. One of the big international signings from 2 years ago. There was I guess two signing periods ago. The biggest name there is Chris Rodriguez, a guy we'll talk about later. But De Los Santos had arguably just as impressive of a pro debut. He hit 370 over about 100 plate appearances with I want to say nine doubles. And he's a legitimate shortstop. So he's coming to the United States. We never know what to make of stats in the Dominican Summer League. This is the absolute lowest level of professional baseball. So guys could dominate down there and then not do anything. But he has the tools to be pretty interesting going forward. Number 36 is a guy, actually, you'll see a lot of people kind of mention Jack Penny as a potential breakout candidate. He was their fifth rounder, I believe, out of Notre Dame a couple years ago. Uh, and it's an interesting skill set there because his strength is contact and getting on base. He's very patient, takes a lot of pitches, so there's a decent amount of strikeouts there too. But he hits the ball pretty hard. He's probably just a second baseman. Down the stretch, West Michigan was using him at shortstop because he was the most dependable there. But I don't expect that to last at higher levels. But he's a guy who could move up if he gets to Double A and has some good results there. Number 35 is Garrett Burhan, a right-handed pitcher out of Ohio State. I want to say he was in the 2021 draft. He's got to be 26, 27 now, right? Um, and he's a guy that we were kind of higher on him before. We expected him to get above Double A at some point. He's been a Double A for the last couple of years, and I think Rogelio touched on it very early that he's lost some velocity. He's always had a very nice slider, and his delivery is sort of reminiscent of Alex Faedo, former Tigers starter turned reliever turned Tampa Bay Ray. I think there might be a reliever profile in there, but this will be a big year for him. Number 34 is Nick Dumanel, who was their seventh or eighth round pick in this last year's draft. He was a guy who came into the draft process, following his junior season, or I guess sophomore season in college, as a potential first round pick. But there were some concerns about his sort of fluidity. Maybe he's a little stiff in the box, and he lasted all the way to the Tigers. And he had a solid pro debut, but it's a very interesting swing. He's very athletic, can play center field, he's got a good arm, is above average runner, but his swing seems to be geared toward hitting the ball on the ground to the opposite field, which is not an ideal profile in baseball these days. They really want you to put the ball in the air, preferably to the pole field. So he's doing the exact opposite. So they've got some work to do there. Um, 33 is Johan Simone, who was actually Who did they trade for him, Raj? Was that I'm blanking on that.
That was Chase Lee.
Chase Lee. So we saw Chase Lee in the Tigers a little bit last year, right? Sort of side-armed reliever. The Tigers traded him to Toronto for Johan Simone. It was kind of one of those situations where you want to get a guy off your 40-man roster and get somebody who you like who isn't on the 40-man. And Simone is a left-handed, probably reliever, kind of low slot pitcher there, but he's in the mid 90s and has some interesting pitches. And I'm very curious to see if they try to develop him as a starter or as a reliever, because we got to see him. He was in the Toronto system, and their minor league teams play Tigers minor leaguers, so we get to see him a little bit. Number 32, Brett Callahan, outfielder, probably a corner outfielder. He was in, I think, our top 20 at the end of last year or beginning of last year. Uh, some interesting tools, but he was picked in the 12th or 13th round a couple years ago, and he's got some power. He's got a very strong arm, one of the best outfield arms in the system. Could fill in at center field, was probably a corner outfielder. And he's a very aggressive hitter who probably won't be able to handle left-handed pitching. So you're looking at a ceiling there of maybe a fourth outfielder. But and I was convinced that we were going to see him in the Arizona Fall League because he had missed some time. He's missed time both the last 2 years, but he did not go. And I don't know if that says anything about what the organization thinks about him or if it's just, he was getting married or something. But so yeah, that's why he's outside of our top 30. And then 31, Trey Cruz, we touched on him earlier. Switch hitter, does a little bit of everything, can play shortstop, can play center field, can play every other position, has a little bit of speed, a little bit of pop, sort of an ideal AJ Hinch player. My only question about him is really how much is he going to hit and how much impact there'll be there. But we'll probably see him in the big leagues at some point this year.
Yeah. And quickly through 30 through or 29 through 20 essentially is a couple names to mention here. Isaac Pacheco, who is at number 22. The reason why I want to mention him is now he's the all-time leader in West Michigan home runs. And there's a joke with minor leaguers that they don't really want to be known for that. Case in point, Austin Bergner is the all-time wins leader in Erie history, and now he's with Texas. But it was a joke when I mentioned something to there was Troy Melton I was talking to last year about that, and he goes, "Don't say anything to Austin about it." And it was a big laugh. But this is an intriguing portion of our top 50 because Jude Warwick, and we're really high on Jude Warwick because he was a infielder drafted out of high school in Illinois. The Tigers have been going to the Midwest quite a bit again after a long absence where it was just SEC guys and basically college SEC guys. That was Al Avila's bread and butter, essentially. If you knew somebody, because he knew the coach at LSU, and he basically was like, "Hey, can we use you?" Sure. Okay, cool. And it was basically that. And then John Peck is a guy who, coming in at number 23, he made the 40-man. He's on the spring training roster, and there's a reason why. He's a really good infielder, has a ton of power. Just the same thing. Sometimes he strikes out a little bit too much. We saw him against Vance pitching last year, and he kind of struggled at Double-A. But he's a guy who I still think has a tremendous upside, and he was able to, I think, handle his own. He just needs a little more time in Erie. And Joseph Montavo, who they acquired in the Texas trade.
Yes.
It's the same high school. Wow, I did not know that, by the way.
Yeah, Macho Man went to the high school. So did Denise Richards briefly.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's a popular high school. It sounds like isn't it a school? Thank you, Mitch, for that. Doesn't it remind you of something from like John Hughes movie, essentially?
For sure. Yeah. And one other note, you often see this. You like baseball players who are two-sport athletes, and Jude Warwick is a two-sport athlete, but his other sport was dance. You don't see that very often. We found some pictures of him looking like a Russian dancer, like jumping up in the air and doing the splits, a good 4 or 5 feet in the air. So
like a Fred Astaire,
which is not a bad second sport to have if you're an infielder, but it's kind of unusual. So that's a fun story about him.
Yeah, and I think that this is a group. Ritzy Chicago suburb. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Then there's if you look at this group of another one of Chris's favorite. This is I'll give Chris. He planted his flag on Johan Koba. Johan Koba, or Cobra as we joke around. He was a guy who really stood out to you last year, Chris. Why did he stand out to you so much? As my words, need some drink here.
Well, I mean, last year was kind of the first year. Within the last 2 years, we discovered that they have video feeds on YouTube for a lot of the Dominican Summer League baseball, And so we were able to watch some of these Tigers games down there. And again, it's the lowest level of minor league baseball, but they do have sort of rudimentary, not even rudimentary. They have uh, velocities and spin rates and movement on the screen when you're watching. And so I was just able to see Yonan Koba pitch for the first time, and he's just intriguing. He's was an 18-year-old, was throwing in the low to mid 90s, could get up to 97, also showed a good changeup and a good breaking ball. And he just looked to me like a guy that, were he a high schooler, and would probably get a bonus somewhere between, a half a million and $1 million, which is the equivalent of a third or fourth round pick. So, uh, but again, I don't really, you won't see him on many other lists, and it's just going on what I thought I saw. And we'll see if he even comes to the United States this year. But we have video. We put it up on our YouTube page. You can watch it if you're into that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just one of those ones where we're kind of taking a stand on somebody we like.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into number 20 and Ben Jacobs, who hasn't made his debut yet, but this is an example of the Tigers actually going a little different from what they've done in the recent drafts, and that was going with college guys. And Jacobs, who was at Arizona, excuse me, it was
State, yeah.
Arizona State, but then he was at another Big Ten school. Well, now it's Big Ten. I think was he at UCLA first, right?
Believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's a guy that we put him on our list automatically because we could see this guy carving up guys in high A relatively quickly, based off his velocity. He has very good command and control. And at 20 with Owen Hall, you love the arm, but it's one of those arms where you're just frustrated as a fan, and we're frustrated for him because I know there's tremendous upside to him. We saw him in Lakeland look pretty good, and then boom.
Yeah, he was one of their two second round picks in 2024 after Bryce Rayner, high school pitcher, and he broke a growth plate in his shoulder or something like that. I guess this is one of the pitfalls of drafting high school players is they're still growing, and sometimes that could lead to injuries. So he is a guy with a good arm. We just haven't seen him pitch much at all.
All right, and then Chris, why don't just go ahead and let's kind of finish this up. I know we want to get some questions in, so let's go through pretty much anybody else in our top 20. I mean, Jackson Strong at number 19 is another name that we're really intrigued by, and I think he might take another step forward this year.
Yeah, he's an athletic outfielder, can play center field, can play right field, doesn't hit the ball particularly hard, but he does consistently pull the ball in the air, which is what we were talking about earlier, is what teams want to see. And he's an above average runner, and it's a fun story because he went to Canisius, which is not exactly a baseball powerhouse. I think of it mostly as a place where John Beeline once coached. But yeah, he's got a guy that we're keeping an eye on. It's he walks a lot and he strikes out a lot. I think he needs to actually get a little bit more aggressive. Right below him, we have Jaden Ham, who was another interesting case. He was a fifth rounder a couple years ago. Briefly got into the back end of some top 100 prospect lists because he was so dominant in High A West Michigan in his pro debut. And all we wanted to see from him last year was just a little bit more velocity. He was kind of like a 93, 94 top guy with very funny, not funny, but exaggerated over the top delivery. And then he paired that fastball with a really nice curveball, basically 12 to 6 curveball. And then last year was just kind of a disaster for him. Not only did he not gain velocity, he lost velocity. At times he was throwing 88, 89, and he got beat up pretty good. He continued to throw strikes, which is impressive, but he paid the price. And so he's one where we don't really know what to do with him. As I said, he I want to say he was on Baseball America's top 100 list in the middle of the season in 2024, and they left him off their top 30 list entirely after last year. So it's been quite a fall for him.
Yeah, and we still think highly of him. It's just a matter of what he can show this year in Double A. And we talked about Micaiah Witherspoon, who comes in there high, and I think the Tigers, his brother, who was drafted by Boston, I want to say, is that right?
Yeah, Kyson Witherspoon, he was a first round pick, and he is a top 100 prospect to most places.
Yeah, I think Witherspoon has the same upside as his brother does. It's just a matter of the Tigers getting a hold of him and shaping him a little bit. And this is, Jake Miller, by the way, we found out had both his hips worked on because he was going to pitch in the Arizona Fall League. And then the Tigers, we thought at first it was because they didn't want anybody to grab. He made the 40-man roster. And this is before they announced it that maybe, we don't want to show off what Miller is. But Miller, very good command. His delivery and reception was pitching very consistently before he got injured. So we'll see what kind of step he takes forward this year.
Yeah, he's a guy that I could see him filling kind of a Tyler Holton role down the road as a he's been a starter in the minors. He's got, as Rich said, deceptive delivery. He's got a good slider. He's got a good changeup. He just needs to stay healthy. But he could probably be a very effective lefty reliever who goes 2, 3 innings or back end starter. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. Number 12 is Michael Oliveto, their second round pick last year. And if I could just make kind of a brief aside here about we talked earlier about the sort of draft philosophies of this front office compared to the previous one. If you were to pick the riskiest demographic in a draft, it would be high school catchers from a northern state. You can count on one hand the number of high school catchers from a northern state who have worked out over the last 25 years. One of them is Joe Mauer, so that's okay. But and then one of them is Joey Votto, but he stopped catching. It's just a really, really risky demographic. High school catchers have a lot of work to do, but this front office believes so much in their ability to scout the hit tool. And Michael Oliveto has an undoubtedly beautiful swing. It's just gorgeous to look at it. Left-handed swing, and he's a really brilliant young kid. He was going to Yale, and you can see videos of him. He's one of those kids who will solve a Rubik's cube in like 8 seconds. Not that necessarily makes you brilliant, but really interesting pick there. And I'm very curious to see what he does this year. We're kind of having not seen him play any pro ball. We're a little bit skeptical there, but he is a guy with a lot of upside. He's got some raw power, so he could be a very fun player to watch.
Yeah, any guy who makes his own bat, similar to Wonder Boy from the
That's right. I
Natural.
forgot about that.
Yeah, makes his own bat. Hey, to me, the fact that he made his own bat for a tournament, and that just shows how much tremendous smart upside he has. Because when I first saw that, I was like, oh no, because I was thinking something along the lines of like, is it Sam McMillan who they drafted out of Washington, where the
Well,
Tigers?
no, so
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
that was that was the same year they took a college catcher out of Washington who washed out of the system within 3 years, and they saved money on Ray Rivera in the second round, I think, to spend on Sam McMillan, a high school catcher out of Florida, and he never made it past A ball, I don't think, and that's not uncommon for high school catchers. It's really hard to project them going forward, but so again, that's how much this organization believes in their ability to scout, and it'll be a test case, really.
Yeah, and I believe it's the same scouts who were in on Kevin McGonigal. So,
Yep.
that makes a lot of sense. Nice mention there with the Sam Crawford reference.
Sam
There.
Crawford made his own bet.
Yeah,
There you
no, that
go.
was a different time. Yeah, but to me, I don't know. It's just a really cool thing to hear him talk. He's a bright young man. And then the last part of our list on top 10, I wanted to mention was Kelvis Salcedo. He's
We
a guy.
should.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but we should mention Chris Rodriguez because
Yes, we should. Yeah, sorry. I didn't want to. I was
he's
kind of saving him until after this, but go ahead.
oh
Yeah, you're good. No, you're good.
my all right, we're gonna argue in front of everybody.
Nah.
No, no, Chris Rodriguez, we have 11th. I just was going to
Yeah,
go, numerically.
yeah.
Who was their big international signing a couple years ago, and may have the most physical upside of anybody in the system, even beyond Josue Briseño or McGonigal or Clark. He is 6'3", 200 pounds, probably gets to 225 in his prime. He's playing center field right now. He may be able to stay there. Guys that big at this age generally get pushed to a corner. But he has remarkable power for a kid that age. He had 10 home runs in the Dominican Summer League last year, including some that were, 114 miles an hour. Some above average major league exit velocities already. He hit a home run off a pitcher. It was a 99 mile an hour fastball. He hit it 109 miles an hour out. So there's a lot of tools there. He also walked like 4% of the time in the Dominican Summer League, which is very hard to do because most of those pitchers can't throw strikes no matter what. So you really have to be swinging at everything. So he's going to be a very interesting case of can this guy develop some plate discipline? If he doesn't, he's probably not even going to get above A ball. If he does, he could be an all-star. So it's really interesting to see what they can do there. So and then we go to Kelvis Salcedo number 10.
Yeah, and one last thing about Rodriguez too. A lot we got a little bit of grief last year about not putting him higher at first, but there's one thing about this list or one thing about Chris and I that we're always been somewhat on the same page on is we want to see these guys play. And a lot of times the list is just sometimes you see it and you go, well, how do they know or what have you? And there's always scouts feeding you and what have you. But we take pride on the fact that we want our evaluators, including anybody who joins our staff, who volunteers to join our staff, have their own take on it. it's okay to be wrong. We've been wrong before. I really, I mean, there's been guys that we were really high up on that didn't pan out. And then there's guys, I mean, like right now, Jace Young has us both blocked on Twitter. He's not a fan of us, and that's okay. But at the same time, we're going to be honest with our evaluations. And Rodriguez, to me, was I had to wait and see kind of approach, and there is glimpses there. But again, also the DSL, horrible. I'm sorry, it's horrible. It's not a way. Well, he had a really good walk rate. Well, these guys are just a level just between. It's almost like Legion Ball, or best way I could put it.
These are players with, like, some of them have major league talent, but their baseball ability of like ninth graders, right? Like it's a really rough watch. You'll see games with 10 passed balls and a dozen wild pitches and 15 walks. It's rough, but so you do the best you can, and yeah, that's what this is the highest we've ever had somebody who has not played in the United States yet. So it just kind of felt like a reaction, like we had to, right? Like everybody else has them in their top 10. Um, and we've seen a little bit of them, but I'm pretty wary.
Yeah, and everybody just gives us grief about that, and that's okay. I mean, it kind of segues into guys like Elvis Salcedo, who wasn't on a lot of people's lists, and he came out and did a really good job last year. He made an adjustment from the FCL Tigers to Lakeland at the age of 19. So that is something that stands out. He just turned 20 in January, and he's already showing that he can handle at least low A. He had a K per 9 last year and just 23 innings pitched, or 12.3. And the walks were really good at that point, because Lakeland last year, you got a lot of credit to their coaching staff last year in Lakeland. They had basically a hodgepodge of pitchers, and they were able to win with that. So I digress. But Salcedo's a guy we hope that can take that next step that Rainer Castillo did not, as far as where he's going to start the season. I think he starts the season in Lakeland, but power arm for being 5'10", kind of a stout build, Chris.
Yeah, he's a barrel. He he's a fascinating pitcher, right-handed pitcher. Um, a huge arm. He sits 95, 96, has been up to 98 with a sinker and a four-seamer. Has a nice slider slash cutter, maybe two different pitches. They both get swings and misses, and he developed a pretty nasty splitter. And the most impressive thing about him, for being his age, is how many strikes he threw. He just pounded the strike zone. But yeah, there are some concerns there because he's listed at 6 foot 180. Roger's right. He's probably 5'10", 250, something like that. And there's a little bit of violence in his delivery that makes people think he's going to be a reliever. To me, I don't necessarily mind violence in your delivery if you're throwing strikes with it. It's a matter of, like, down the road, it's going to be about how well can he command pitches. But he was absolutely dominant in the minors last year. You said, from the Florida Complex League to Florida State League, so rookie ball to low A, his ERA was 1.83 in 68 and two-thirds innings. He held opposing hitters to a 133 batting average. Nobody nobody could lift the ball out against his sinker, and when he threw his other pitches, they couldn't make contact with it. So he's a very fascinating prospect this year. We expect to see him probably. I don't know. It'll be tough to see his assignment. Like I would love to see them push him to West Michigan because he was so dominant in low A Lakeland. But the Tigers have been pretty conservative with their promotions, so we'll see where he starts.
Yeah, and that, as far as like the rest of our top 10 goes, I think that it's pretty. To me, we mentioned Lorenzo Framber Montilla is a guy who really high on. He's not appearing on a lot of lists, but like his energy, like his ability to play both second base and shortstop. He did go for shortstop last year when Rainer went down. Hitting wise, still needs a little bit of work, but he's a guy who I think will see. I think he might potentially start the season in West Michigan. Well, yeah, I think he's going to start that, but I love his baseball IQ, very high IQ for his age. And Chris, in terms of what else to you stands out besides he's just a slick fielder to me. I think his defense is a lot better than what the scouts are saying out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Frank Montilla, so he's a switch hitter for one, and he is. Yes, you'll see. People put 70 grades on his arm and his defense as a shortstop. I'm not going that high, but I think he does have a chance to be an above average to plus defender at shortstop, and that's going to buy you a lot of time to develop as a hitter. He has shown some power. He's a very aggressive and fun base runner. He'll take extra bases. He puts pressure on hitters or on pitchers. So there's a lot to like there. It's just a matter of getting him more reps. He's still relatively young, but yeah, we think the upside there is of an everyday regular, which is would be very valuable, right? But it's this low in the system, we don't want to necessarily push him up. After him is Hao Yu Lee. Hao Yu Lee made the 40-man roster. Infielder, had a lot of buzz in spring training last year. Uh, he split time relatively evenly between second base and third base. I think he's a legitimately good second baseman. He's got the tools to play third base. He just kind of gets rushed, and he often overthrows, and it leads to a lot of throwing errors. But he's a guy. They required him from Philadelphia in the Michael Lorenzen trade. Hits the ball incredibly hard for somebody who's only 5'10". And he's also a faster runner than people realize. He posts, plus sprint speeds at times. So just a really interesting collection of tools. He may top out as sort of an Andy Ibanez type, who because he really does mash against left-handed pitching, but was only 22 in AAA last year, and I think there's still time for him to continue to get better.
Yeah, and I think that one of the we was number 6 with Jordan Yost, and that was another one too where I don't know, I haven't seen enough, but what we could find on him was very little, and I felt like this was more of a pressure thing.
Well, I mean, we said before, I'm looking right now. I had him 10th, you had him ninth. A couple other people had him 5th, 11th, 7th. One of the things that we learned from this process is that and we mentioned it before, there's a very set in stone top 4 in this organization. And after that, it's anybody's guess. And so what happens is players who were like, yeah, he deserves to be around here, end up moving up higher on the list. So he's 6th on our list. Um, he was the Tigers' first round pick last year. I mentioned it with Michael Oliveto earlier, the catcher out of New York. Yost is a shortstop out of Florida, and he was not ranked as a first round pick on any of the public sites. Baseball America had him more of a second round, third round pick. Same with MLB Pipeline. And so this is another test of this Tiger scouting acumen to see if they really got one here. But he stands out for his contact skills and probably being able to stay at shortstop and plus speed. We'll see what happens. They could have, like I said, they could have gotten one on the scouting industry here, or maybe they flew too close to the sun. We'll find out this year. This will be his debut.
Yeah, and as far as that goes, I think the rest of her, like I said, the top 5 was, or top 4 rather, was the consensus across all prospect lists. I mean, I for everywhere I went, every list I saw, Briseño, Rayner, Clark, McGonigal. I don't think there's not one list that went deviated differently. So I think that puts it in line with what everybody else is right now, and I think puts the Tigers in a good position in the next couple of years with guys that are right on the cusp of things. I think Max Clark will be ready by next year. Having Clark changed my mind. The story is that when he first got drafted, we always do a draft show every year. And my initial reaction, because they did not get the
Florida.
Langford. Yeah, and I was like, oh, what? And I was mad and everything. And then after seeing Clark play, and after talking to the young man a few times, or just at first, I didn't think he liked us, but then, you know what? I think it's because we came clean. We were like, look, I was wrong. But Clark, we got a chance to talk in December. Really, really smart guy. Really knows his stuff. He was able to break down the outfield in West Michigan, why the wind was directing his hits a certain way. He knows the stuff, and he is very well aware of what he's doing to increase the lift on his ball. We were talking about slugging percentage and how much an ISO, looking at how important ISO is as a stat in AA, and we were both agreed on that, and how telling that was. And so I really, I think Clark has a good career after this in TV too. He for his age, he's smarter than some 40-year-olds I know. Honestly, like he's a bright kid, and you root for a guy like that because he really, really cares about his craft.
He is absolutely sort of magnetic personality. He's the sort of guy that if he gets to the big leagues and has success, you're probably going to see him everywhere. He's going to be one of these players who could be the face of baseball. So that was and his makeup is through the roof. So that's the thing that I'm encouraged by, because he hasn't been a perfect player. He's had some issues with his hitting and hitting the ball on the ground the opposite way a little too much, but he's been working on it, and he works constantly. and he's the sort of guy who's going to get everything out of his potential. So that's a great. I mean, he's number 10 prospect everywhere. I keep track of all the 100 lists, the top 100 lists put out there. He is the consensus number 5 prospect in baseball. But somehow the Tigers have a player who's better than that in the consensus number 2 prospect in baseball, Kevin McGonigal, who a lot of people want to see make the Tigers out of spring training. I think it's possible if he has an excellent spring, but it seems unlikely to me.
I mean, this is a guy who exit velocities in Double A. We had some access some of the data. I mean, he had a ball at 115 miles an hour off. The pitcher for the Nationals system,
Marlon
Susanna,
Susana.
who is a guy who throws 102, 103 easily, and McGonigal hit one that literally landed almost in the neighborhood at in Erie at
UPMC.
yes, thank you, Park. And so McGonigal, McGonigal, even like you could tell he was getting bored in Lakeland last year. When he was in Lakeland, remember how Chris, when you saw some games where he wasn't getting pitched, he was like, "Screw, I'm just going to walk the whole time." And he has been an advanced hitter at every level. He mashed his way through West Michigan. It was just, and then the adjustment to see him do that in Erie, that was something that triggered the Cole Keith thing in my head. I remember when Cole Keith got to Double A and mashed his way through, and basically what we've been hearing from a lot of like people we respect, like JJ Cooper and Jeff Pontus of Baseball America. If you dominate the level, that is a good sign of things to come. And dominating, I mean, talking like hitting, WRC plus over 150 in cases, and just if you're hitting all the numbers and you're not you're not getting cheapies out there. I mean, for example, Gage Workman led the league in I think it was batting average in Erie and Double A, but was it dominating? No, he still had a strikeout rate of over 30%. But McGonigal was above board for his age. And that's another thing, too, is the age and that's another thing about this top 10. Hyu Lee, some people are saying, oh, look at prospect fatigue. He's still young for his level. He's only, I mean, the average level, I believe, in Toledo was like 24, I believe it was, and he's 22. So that's where we want fans to understand that just because a guy's been in the minor leagues for a couple of years does not mean, or at one level, does not mean he's bad. And that's another, like, that's one or overarching thing out there that we want to get fans to understand, and everybody for that matter. Just it's not indicative of their future performance.
I guess the last thing I'll say on McGonigal is it's about as good of a combination of hitting ability, patience, and power as you'll ever see. Hit over 300 last year, had 19 home runs and 31 doubles in like 88 games, walked more than he struck out. As Raj touched on, he's done this against advanced competition, other top 100 prospects. He hits just about everyone and everything. And Double A pitchers started getting throwing him breaking balls away, trying to land them away, and he kind of obliged for a while, rolling over the ball, hitting ground balls to first base and second base. So there will always be things to work on. But if you make a mistake, he's going to punish it, and he's got a chance to down the road win batting titles, possibly even compete for MVP awards. He's an incredible offensive talent who is, yeah, by the way, can play shortstop, probably better at second base, could be a plus defender at second base. So this is a guy who's going to be a huge part of any future playoff teams for the Tigers.
Yeah. So with that, if anybody has any questions or anything, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm just going to say it's 1:31, so let's go to questions. While Raj and Chris are taking questions, can people who want to talk or share their memories about Lolich um, put up their hands virtually so I can see how many people are going to want to speak? Because that would make a difference as to how long we go with the prospect guys. And I'm going to take the first question. Um, I noticed you mentioned Jace Young, who's of course fallen off the radar screen. Do you think there's a chance Max Anderson is another Jace Young? A guy with a good enough bat to be a prospect, but not good enough to really hit major league pitching hard and never's going to find a position?
I just did an article on Young and looking at some of his numbers second half of the last year in Toledo. It was night and day where he was hitting the fastball better and he was hitting breaking balls better. I think with Young, I think if it's similar to Anderson, I think their future is probably perhaps it really depends on what the Tigers want to do. Ideally, what I mean by that is that I think that if the Tigers can put him in the outfield, that would give him a like maybe like right field or something like that. Um, I like to see what he can do as a but I think right now he's a utility player at best. I mean, he could be like Dan Ugley, who was a second baseman for the Braves, who was kind of short, stout guy, but he also hit a lot of home runs. But Anderson, to me, right now, until he can really sharpen his defensive ability, I think he's a guy I think could be possibly traded for something else that better suit the Tigers' needs. I don't know about you, Chris, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think he could end up that kind of player, although it's a slightly different profile. Young has always had a ton of patience, walks a lot, has a lot of power. What he's run into is inability to make contact at the big league level and then not provide any value with his defense. Although he did get better at third base, I'll give him credit for that. Anderson is if he runs into trouble at higher levels, it's going to be because advanced pitchers will throw him pitches in the zone or just outside of the zone that he can't not swing at. And what he'll end up doing is making poor contact and not impacting the ball. And again, not having any of those secondary skills. I think the Tiger of most recent vintage who reminds me of that sort of profile is Dawel Lugo. If people remember him, he was one of the three prospects the Tigers acquired from Arizona for JD Martinez. Uh, now, I'm not saying that like he's going to be that, but if it doesn't work out for him, it's going to probably look more like that as a guy who just swings too much for his own good.
I didn't see any hands go up, so maybe there isn't going to be a lot of reminiscing about Lowlitz. So we're going to go on here. I want to note that I checked this morning the other standard rating systems for the Tigers, although I don't think MLB has issued their organizational rankings yet. I couldn't find them. And I don't think Fangraphs has, although I'm not a subscriber, so I'm not sure. But Baseball Prospectus had the Tigers organization at 6, Baseball America at 4, Keith Law at 7. Raj said that he thought Keith was overly critical of Max Anderson, but I will note, and I'm not criticizing you, Raj, because I think you guys are probably more right about Anderson than Law. That Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, and MLB had only 2 Tigers prospects in the top 10, 2 in the top 20. That is, no one else besides Clark and McGonigal in the top 20, and only 4 in the top 100, where Law had 2 in the top 10, 3 in the top 20, and 5 in the top 100. So he actually had, while he rated the system lower, he actually had more respect for the individual top prospects.
One thing we didn't really touch on Bryce Rayner when we were running down the prospects there. This was their first round pick from 2 years ago. Shortstop, really strong arm. We talked about him. I truly believe that had he stayed healthy last year, he would be a top 10 prospect in baseball as well, because of the combination of being able to play shortstop, and he has tremendous power for a player that young. We were looking it up. I forget the exact number, but I think it was balls hit 110 miles an hour or harder last year. I think that was it. And Riley Green led the entire organization with 20. Nobody else in the entire organization had more than 6, at least of what we can find. We don't have publicly available exit velocity data at high A or double A. So it's probably safe to assume that Josue Briseño and McGonigal at least hit the ball pretty hard too. But Bryce Rayner had 4 balls hit 110 miles an hour as a 19-year-old in 30 games. So he probably would have been second in the organization. So a ton of power. It's a shame he got hurt. He's one of the guys we're most looking forward to watching this year.
Yeah, because he's so highly ranked after hardly playing in the minors. He doesn't even have one full season in the minors, right?
Yeah.
Because he started after the draft 2 years ago and he was injured last year. I made a note here. What um, what did other people not see in him that the Tigers did? Because it's not like he's been in the minors 3 years and has torn up Double A, and so everyone thinks he's a top 10 or top 20 prospect. He's had very little pro experience, and yet people think really highly of him. And I'm not saying they're wrong.
I, I think it has a lot to do with his pedigree going to Harvard Westlake High School, which is, I mean, a lot of predominantly like Jack Flaherty went there. That's a school that's starting to produce quite a bit of talent. As far as I mean, Pete Crow Armstrong went there, Max Fried, Lucas Giolito. There's a lot of names in there that are,
And then Bosch.
Yeah, yeah. No, Brandon Bosch. Yes, I forgot. Thank you. The Tiger with a cup of coffee, a little more than a cup of coffee. But the reason why it stands out is because the Tigers have been relatively conservative. Usually, these guys are in complex league, throw them in complex league, and then they go to Lakeland. He started in Lakeland and was at first, even like when he was slowly adjusting, you could saw loud contact. And once he started clicking, it was gone from the races. And the Tigers haven't really had a teenage infielder like that just come in and just go. I mean, McGonigal, you can argue that with McGonigal, but at Brainer for his size, but just looking how smooth he was in the infield. Like I said, there was a throw that he made from third base that was like on the edge of the grass, and he just threw this. It still sticks on my brain. And Chris, I think you know what throw I'm talking about,
Yeah.
where it was just right on the line, and it was the first time in a while where you saw a Tiger, somebody on the left side of the infield, not have to strain to throw a ball because it was just like it was like a perfect like whoa, and it stood out to me. And I think that's the reason why you see the upside there and why he landed there. Honestly, if you look at that, Chris is more of the draft expert than me. I'll truly admit that, but I think it's because you look at the top 10 in that draft. The Angels have their way of going. Christian, they always go college guy right away to make the impact. Nick Kurtz, of course, you see what he's off to right now. Um, I think the top 10 in front of him, Rayner was just happened to be, it was lucky he fell right there. I thought they should have picked Cam Smith, and I love Cam Smith. That was a guy who I really was high on. But go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, Rayner's an interesting case because we've talked about his arm a bunch. Most scouts thought he should be a pitcher up until he was a senior. He pitched a lot as a freshman and was projected to be a good pitcher. He was, 96, 98 mile an hour fastball with a really good breaking ball. And when scouts see that, they're like, yeah, you should pitch. But he always wanted to hit. And what happened is, the biggest time to be judged as a high school hitter is on the so-called showcase circuit, which is this series of a bunch of tournaments between your junior and senior year of high school. And Rayner did not have a very good showcase circuit. He swung and missed a lot, didn't didn't hit particularly well. And what he did is over the offseason, then he worked on his swing a ton. And he came out as a senior in high school looking much better. But there's not a ton of opportunities to showcase that other than well, shoot, the name of the tournament, it's down in North Carolina. It's in Cary, North Carolina. It's the National High School Invitational. And he had, I think, 4 of the 5 hardest hit balls there. But there's still some skepticism about his overall hitting ability. And the same is the case with Connor Griffin, who is now the consensus number 1 prospect in baseball. He went 9th in the 2024 draft because people didn't think he could hit. They were worried about the hit tool. And then he came out and he hit. And Bryce Rayner did largely the same thing. And so sometimes this is when it gets down to draft day, you panic a little bit and you just feel safer about those high school or the college hitters or college pitchers because you've seen them against better competition. But as is often the case, the high schoolers have more upside because they have more development ahead of them. So I think that's what happened there with Rayner.
Yeah. Yeah. Rayner, it's got, I can't wait to see what he does this year, wherever he's going to start the season at once he's healthy.
It's interesting that what you say about the confidence to draft high schoolers. It used to be that organ before analytics, and maybe in the analytics era up until 15 years ago or something, old school teams would draft high schoolers because they didn't want a top prospect to go to college and have the college coach teach him stuff that they wouldn't like. And if he was a pitcher, burn out his arm if he was the ace of the staff. And so they would draft high school players, but they didn't develop them. Very few of them made it to be stars in the major leagues. And now we're seeing smart organizations like the Tigers who have the ability and focus on development, drafting high schoolers not because they think that the college players have been corrupted, which is silly. It was always silly, except the worry about the arms of college pitchers who get into the College World Series was really true. Um, but not because of that, but because if they develop them properly, they've got a major league star or at least a major league regular 2 years before a college player would develop, or the college player might peak early and then taper off. So it's a complete reversal of why they do that, and it makes sense to me.
And I don't want to spend because if I bring up this topic, we could spend another 30 minutes talking about it. But there is a pretty prevalent feeling that Major League Baseball is trying to push more players to college now, so that they can pare down more minor league teams.
Well, they're going to pare down the minor leagues either way, right?
Yeah,
Right.
They're going to
yeah,
cut another level.
yeah, and they believe, they want college baseball to serve as the development ground, the way it does for college football or college basketball, for the NBA and NFL. And so you're going to see that. And then you also see Major League Baseball, because some teams are just very cheap. There's no other way to put it. They don't want to spend the money on technology in the minor leagues now. So Major League Baseball is now regulating what kind of technology you can have in the minors. And so teams can't have contracts with individual companies that might, have to give them any sort of advantage. So, I mean, everybody's going to have the same stuff now, but this is not because, they were worried about some team, you know, cornering the market. It's because the other teams didn't want to spend money. It's unfortunate, and we see this all the time in baseball. Saving money on things that help you because you just are cheap. So
Yeah. Well, then, Rob Manfred, I think one of the companies mentioned, I think he's somehow tied to him in some way or shape or form. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm like, where's the catch? There it is.
Yeah. Well, even um, I don't want to draw too many lessons from tabletop baseball. Back 40 years ago, when I had a tabletop baseball league I ran in at MSU. One of my partners running the league was chair of the political science department. Great guy. And this one before the season started one year, he was feeding all this analytical information about what you want, smart strategies in our game. We actually developed our own game, and so it was different than Stratomatic or APA, and he was feeding this, and I said, Dave, do you really want to tell everyone that? Doesn't that, I mean, they could discover it from themselves. We're not hiding anything. The ratings are there and the mechanics are there. So you're just giving away our competitive edge. He said, nah. He says, you can tell them this stuff. That doesn't mean they're going to be smart enough to use it. And sure enough, the guys who were the bottom feeders in the league didn't use it. And
yeah.
that's what I think about a lot of clubs. I mean, it's great that MLB is going to standardize the analytics and the biometric stuff, data in the minors. That doesn't mean if you don't have a smart management and you don't hire smart people in baseball operations and in your farm system to coaches, it won't matter. Well, you just won't take advantage of it.
We've seen that on the international market too. There are some teams that just did not participate in trying to get international players. Baltimore, up until a couple of years ago, just didn't even do anything. And it's just because they're cheap. But I
Yeah,
don't know. That's the way it is. It's their prerogative, I guess. If you get to own the team, you get to cheap out as much as you want.
right. Okay, it's 1:45. I have a couple of minutes of stuff to do at the end of the meeting. I want to talk about some upcoming meetings. So we're going to break here and talk about Mickey Lolich and maybe even about Ron Teasley. I was surprised. I thought we'd have a lot of people who wanted to reminisce about Lolich and watching the 68 World Series, but apparently not. However, Mitch Lutsky is going to talk about Lolich. Um, and Mitch is, I think he's got enough gray hair. Yeah, he's retired. Yeah, and he's got Lolich's book. Did anyone else read Lolich's book with Tom Gage that came out like 7, 8 years ago?
I have not had a chance to.
Yeah, I bought a copy because I arranged a signing for Lolich with our at a SABR meeting, and I went to another one of their book sessions. I bought a copy, but I never read it. Maybe I'll read it now that he's dead. That which makes no sense.
I
Anyway,
thought it was really good. So I went to the Saber thing at the Detroit Library, and here's Mickey's autograph and Tom Gage as well. I thought it was one of the better look back books of a team that they had done, had won a championship. I do remember vaguely the 68 World Series. I was in lower elementary school, but of course, Lolich pitched another 7 or 8 years, for the Tigers. So obviously I remember him. Um, and the two things reflecting back on his life, first of all, his numbers surpass several pitchers who are in the Hall of Fame. And actually, when Tom Gage did the intro at the SABR meeting at the Detroit Library that Gary had set up, Gage, and I wish I would have written this down or recorded it, he listed like 8 pitchers, and Mickey Lolich. It was like Walter Johnson, Bob Gibson, Tom Seaver, Rube Waddell, Lefty Gomez, and Mickey Lolich. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is it. And he says, these guys all share, and he just read off like over 200 and some wins, so many strikeouts, World Series MVP. All of them were in the Hall of Fame, but Mickey Lolich. Now, when you're growing up, every Tiger is a Hall of Famer, like Ike Brown, Gates Brown, Willie Horton, Mickey Stanley. Everybody's a Hall of Famer when you're a little kid. So one of the things I was impressed when they wrote this book, it was published, I think, in 2018, was that Mickey Lolich was a really good player. And just because he was our player, he was also a really good player over Major League Baseball. And Reggie Jackson was quoted either earlier in an interview or after Lolich's passing about how good Mickey Lolich was. He had this rubber arm. He would attack you as the batter, that he was very difficult to handle. And they said, he laughed at me because you got this chubby looking guy up there, and he's just throwing, 300 innings a year. But the other thing, and I remember this, that when Lolich was giving his talk in 2018 or so, he and Denny McClain were not on friendly terms. They weren't mortal enemies, but there was a friction there, and I noticed it. But if you look at anything that Denny McClain had said this week about Lolich as a person, as a teammate, and his pitching skill, it was really, really positive. It was very gracious. It was very much that he had a great arm, that we relied on him in the World Series. It was really something that I didn't expect to see. And I've met Denny McClain a couple of times at signings and some things. So I thought that was really nice, at least from a fan, to see that go full circle. And the other thing I had read about, and this was the question I asked Mickey Lolich at the SABR thing, I said, you had a rubber arm, you never had an injured arm. When you went to the Mets and the Padres, you were healthy, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I had read that you copied Satchel Paige's post pitching repertoire. And he said he did. He said he couldn't figure out why all these guys, I think he was in the minors, were icing their arms and they'd get hurt. And the icing wasn't really working for him. And somehow he came across a gentleman that had been a trainer either with the Kansas City Monarchs or had worked with Satchel Paige years ago. And he said, what did old Satch do? And he said, Satch took a hot shower after the game and just put hot water on his pitching arm for like 15 minutes, as hot as he could stand it. And he says, I never had an injured arm. And I kept telling other ball players to do the same thing. So when I said, this is what I had read doing some research, Mickey, that you had copied Satchel Paige's, after pitching treatment, I want to know if that's true. And I remember he had this big smile on his face, and he said something like, young man, or something like that, you have done your research. That's exactly correct. He said, if it's good enough for old Satch, it's good enough for old Mickey. So I thought that was really interesting that he brought that out. He was with us for, I think, Gary, 90 minutes. We only thought we were going to get him for like 30 or something. He went on forever. He was very gracious. He said, I don't want anybody taking a picture in front of the table. So everybody got behind the table when he signed it. He couldn't have been friendlier. And I had heard that he'd been kind of prickly over the years. So I just really liked the fact that one of my, boyhood heroes, being a Tigers fan, was very receptive. And I think he ended his, last 10 years on good graces with apparently Denny McClain, with teammates, and with the fans, and that he deserves to be looked at, as does Sweet Lou Whitaker and Bill Freehan, for the Hall of Fame. So that's my personal, what little bit I had insight into Mickey Lolich.
Yeah, that meeting was a terrific meeting, and Lolich was a great guest. And of course, Tom Gage was there, and Tom could contribute too. I do think Lolich was more prickly in other places. I think in our meeting, he was, let's say, more agreeable because he knew, or we demonstrated as audience members, that we knew our stuff, right?
Yes.
And of course, everybody there really appreciated and knew how historic his achievements were. I'm sorry, Rod Nelson, I think. Oh, Rod's still here. Rod, were you at that meeting? If you're still on? Rod's now in Colorado, but he was in Detroit then. Um, anyway, yeah, I'm surprised McLean was so gracious. Because he is Mr. SOB. I will tell a story because it's today is I believe yesterday was Babe Ruth's birthday. Tonight is the Babe Ruth's birthday bash at Nemo's, which Tom Derry, the founder of the Hamtramck Stadium Grounds Group, puts on every year. It's so crowded there you can barely walk through the bar. It takes 20 minutes to get a beer or a hot dog, but that's because everyone's having a good time. Anyway, a few years ago, Tom paid McLean to come and sign autographs. And I don't know how much he paid McLean, but it had to be thousands of dollars. I can't imagine he would appear for less than $2,000. And McLean went in, sat at a table, and charged everyone for the autograph because Tom had paid him in advance not to charge people individually for the autographs. McLean did it anyway. What a guy. Oh, good. So I didn't know you have an upcoming appearance here, Mitch. So look in the chat there. Mitch has got an appearance about his book in Livonia, right?
Yep.
Isn't it?
Schoolcraft Community College on Tuesday, March 24th at the McDowell Center room. Now I know what room I'm going to, MC 100 B and C. There's a link there from Wayne Pricer. I'm going to have lunch and do a book talk and meet and greet about the Page Fence Giants. And Gary, I still have not heard back from the Lugnuts as to when their Page Fence Giants tribute is. Actually, somebody bumped into me yesterday and asked if I knew where it was because that's the Lugnuts game they go to every year. So I don't know, but I'm excited to go down to in about a month to speak to people at Schoolcraft for their campus book club.
Yeah, that's great. Mitch, send me the details after the meeting, and I'll send it out to everyone on the in the chapter and
Oh,
in the Toledo
okay,
chapter. Okay.
okay.
I don't want to try to pick it out of the chat. Um, let me make a couple of announcements before we take before the meeting goes blank. I'm not. We have a 2 hour window. I don't know what happens at 2 hours. I don't know if the Zoom turns into a pumpkin or not. One is we're going to have a watch party for opening day. Opening day not being the home opener, but the opening day, which the Tigers are playing an afternoon game in San Diego. First pitch is 4:05 Eastern time. We're going to do this in Williamston and Mitch's stomping grounds. There's a craft brewery there, Old Nation, that has terrific beer, pretty good food, and it's a really nice environment. We're going to try to draw some people from West Michigan and from Central Michigan, where not had a lot of success in previous SABR meetings getting people there. So it'll be March 26th, starting at 4 p.m., or you can come earlier. And Mitch has made an arrangement with the owners there. I hope some of you could show up. It'll be a good time, and because it's a 4 o'clock first pitch, I'll have time to drive back to Detroit or Grand Rapids, wherever. Second, I've been contacted by the author of the new Ron LaFleur biography. I believe it's not out yet. I think it's coming out around opening day. And we're going to have him on sometime later in April or in early May. Uh, I'm fascinated to know what he's come up with. He's a Adam Hennig, Henig. He's a pretty good author, and he's done some interesting biographical work. I know a little bit about LaFleur's life, not too much. I mean, mostly what everyone knows from the newspapers. So I'm fascinated to see what else he's come up with. I've also been contacted by a guy who's done a book on Hall of Fame baseball attorneys. As you know, a lot of managers, including Huey Jennings, were attorneys. And he contacted me, and I said, well, I'm not too sure there's going to be a lot of interest in this. Um, and then I said, but if you want to focus on the Tigers guys, especially Jennings, I think there would be interest. So I'm going to have him, we're going to do a book club kind of format like we used to do before Zoom.
Good.
And there's another guy who's got a history of the Canadian Major Baseball League in Southwest Ontario that has contacted me. So we'll have the opening day watch party. We'll
Well,
have two or
Joanne
three.
thinks it's his sister.
I'm sorry, what? Somebody said something. I didn't catch it. Okay. Um, we're gonna have um, we're gonna have the opening day watch party 2 or 3 book club type meetings,
Wow.
and there'll be Mitch's appearance in Livonia too. Okay, 157. Yeah, Raj has put in the chat that Labatt Park in London, Ontario is reputedly, and I think it's true, the oldest field in a baseball field in America that's in continuous use. The structure there, the grandstand, is not as old as the field. The field dates back to the 1880s, I believe. The grandstand, I think, only dates back to the 30s. It's a really nice place to see a game if you ever want to. I don't know who's playing now besides the semi-pro league there. The Tigers had a farm club there for a while, not too long. And then the Frontier League team that played as a road team for a couple years and played at EMU for 1 year went bankrupt and moved to London and became the what was it, the London Rippers, which has got to be one of the worst names for a baseball team, the London Rippers, because it's a play on Jack the Ripper, of course. And I thought that was horrible, but it's a great place if you ever have a chance to go see a game there. All right, 158. Anyone want to speak up for a minute or two?
I just want to say thanks for having Chris and I on. This was really fun and getting a chance to hopefully we'll catch up with some of the chapter members here
Yeah.
in the next month or so.
You know, I forgot. You guys didn't promote all the things you're doing. Send me an email which lists all the places you can be found and I will put that out to all the chapter members in Detroit and Toledo. Okay.
Okay.
And
Thanks
that will
very much.
include a lot of Tigers fans who are out or all across the country because SABR chapters are not geographical. Okay. Yeah, so be sure to do that, and I'll send that out today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gary, I might just try to close the meeting with a little bit of humor, but I'm very impressed with understanding what the weather is in Michigan, that you've got that fan blowing over your head.
It's been very, very cold for the last 3 weeks here. I'm thinking this is going to be one of the coldest months or February's ever, with a fair amount of snow, but mostly in small increments. No, not really any big blizzard. But it's very sunny today, and our condo is on the 17th floor, facing south, and my office has a west window and a south window. So in late afternoons, the sun really heats it up. That's why I have the overhead fan on.
Well, that's good.
So Francis is in North Carolina, so he's always curious about how we're freezing in
Now it's
Michigan.
cold. It's cold enough down here.
Is it? Well, okay, anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're with 30s.
Everybody,
Low
2 o'clock. So thank you all for attending. Look forward to seeing you at our next meeting on the 26th if you can make it. And if not, if you're from the Detroit area, stop in to see Mitch's talk. Mitch is Mr. Page Fence, and the stories are fascinating. If you haven't read his book, the stories are fascinating, and he did a lot of research. Page Fence long deserved a book-length history, and he's the only one to do it so far. And I don't think anyone else will do it because he did such a good job. Okay, thanks everybody. Take care.
Hi.